I call the November 9th, 2021 City Council regular meeting to order. City Clerk Ben Lane, please conduct the roll call.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor David Ortega.
Present.
Vice Mayor Tammy Caputi.
Here.
Council members Tom Durham.
Here.
Betty Janik.
Here.
Kathy Littlefield. Here. Linda Milhaven. Here. And Solange Whitehead.
Here.
City Manager Jim Thompson.
Here.
City Attorney Sherry Scott.
Here.
City Treasurer Sonia Andrews.
Here.
City Auditor Sharon Walker.
Here.
And the clerk is present. Thank you, Mayor.
Excellent. We have Scottsdale police officers Anthony Wells and Dustin Patrick, as well as firefighter Anthony Portillo, if anyone requires their assistance. Well, on November 2nd, residents of Scottsdale voted to ratify a new general plan. City Council, staff, and the public worked very hard to ensure this plan was written by all stakeholders and reflected everyone's vision for Scottsdale moving forward. Thank you all for doing your research and voting for the future of Scottsdale. Now, this Saturday, November 13th, the McDowell-Sonoran Preserve will celebrate the unveiling of the Pima Dynamite Trailhead and Art Decatur Amphitheater. That event will be at 9 o'clock in the morning, Saturday, November 13th. Art Decatur was a preserve pioneer and the founding chair of the McDowell-Sonoran Preserve Commission. I'm proud we are honoring his legacy, and I hope everyone has a chance to visit the Pima Dynamite Trailhead and the Art Decatur Amphitheater. This Thursday, November 11th, is Scottsdale's Veterans Day Commemoration. It will be held at the McCormick-Stillman Railroad Park at 3 p.m. This event is free to the public and is a great opportunity to show our appreciation and respect for those who have served our great nation. We will have a complete complement presentation, and I hope to see a lot of the families and friends there. At this point, I will open public comment. Public comment is reserved for Scottsdale citizens to comment on non-agendized items that are within the council's jurisdiction. No official council action can be taken on these items, and speakers are limited to 3 minutes. My record shows that there are no requests to speak at this time for the public comment. So accordingly, I will close public comment. Next, we will have the approval of the minutes, and I will request a motion to approve the regular meeting minutes of October 5th, 2021, work study session minutes of October 5th, 2021, special meeting minutes of October 12th, 2021, and work study session minutes of October 12th, 2021. Are there any corrections? If not, I'll receive the motion in a second.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. I see a motion by Councilmember Janik and a second by Durham. Please register your vote. Thank you. Unanimous. Our next item are the consent agenda items 1 through 16. We are open to have public comment on any of these consent items, and at this point I see none requested. Also, if anyone has any comment for any reason, would like anything pulled to a regular agenda, that could be done at the council level. So at this point, I see no comment on the consent agenda items, and those are 1 through 16. Therefore, I will close public comment and ask for a motion and a second on consent agenda items.
I make a motion to accept the consent agenda items 1 through 16.
I'll second that.
See a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, please register your vote. Thank you. That appears unanimous. Next, we will move to item number 17, which apparently there is none. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. Well, 17 is the citizens petition. Citizens petition is an opportunity under our charter for people to come forward with any petition request. Have there been any received? No. So there were none received, and we will move on, therefore, to Mayor and Council, items 18 and 19. And the subject on number 18 is the Development Review Board membership of a request. I see Vice Mayor Caputi has her hand up.
I would just like to speak to this item, please. Item number 18.
Okay. Well, thank you, and I see that coming up. So since I will open the topic and the discussion on the question that has been posted. As you know, there are 4 duties involved in the boards and commission. The first duty, of course, rests with the council itself. So we have the duty of appointing commissioners and boards, as you heard earlier today, to do their job according to the mission of the respective boards and commission. That's the primary duty. The second duty rests with the commissioners themselves and board members. That is, that they should do their job in terms of the mission and so forth of the listed boards and commissions. When commissioners are onboarded, they agree to abide by the questions of conflict of interest, of tardiness, avoiding that, and there is a requirement to submit recusals and also specific performance on absences. The third duty that's listed in our rules is the duty of the chair or the staff liaison to report absences to the mayor. So that duty is very clear, and when, as mayor, I receive that notice at my desk, then I have a standard procedure, which is to address the report, and which I typically do by a very standard method. In this case, we're bringing forth the question of Mr. Faki's attendance and absences for the Development Review Board. On all other occasions, I use the same process, whether there be of any board whatsoever. My standard process is that when I receive that notice from the commissioner, chair, or the liaison staff, I immediately have staff email that commissioner or board member. That email states the out-of-compliance absences or whatever issues that may have come that would breach the terms of service which are observed by all board and commission members. In my standard letter, I do offer the opportunity to resign, and in this case, I asked for a response within 5 days. I did not receive that response until 9 days, and in the interim, I did make a call to Mr. Faki and reiterating the letter on the 29th of October, maybe September, I was told that he would not resign, and at that point, we are here today because when I get a request from a commissioner chair and it comes to my table, one thing I will not do is I will not put it in my drawer. I will not put it in the bottom drawer. It's my duty to act on it in an informed and polite manner, which I have done, and also, I cannot cut a special deal or talk about additional absences with any board or commissioner that exceeds 3 absences in a row, as specified, or 4 absences in 6 months. None of us up here unilaterally can offer any other extensions of absences or imply that in any discussion. Now, in this case, Mr. Faki decided that he would choose not to resign, although he did exceed the acceptable number of absences. And the one thing that I will not do in any case is I will not lower the bar. I will not, the standard of 3 in a row and 4 out of 6 in 6 months, is not something that I feel is something to be toyed with. So, at this point, I have outlined the reason why, of course, the body which appoints members is the body that will remove a potential member or act upon this with the full information with full transparency. So that's the reason for our situation today. Accordingly, I will move to for the council to remove Mr. Faki for excessive absences, which are in line with all the other requirements of all other board members. And that, by my motion, that would open the discussion. Okay? Good.
Yes, I'd like to speak.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I do not hear a second for the motion that I made. So accordingly, I don't hear a second for that, correct? Okay. Well then, I will, on one hand, there's a question of whether or not there's a discussion of there's no motion and there's no second for that. So in that case, is there any other motion of any sort before we move on to the next item?
Sure. I mean, I'd like to speak, but I'd also like to make a different motion.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
You can make a different motion.
Okay, sure. I'm gonna say a few words first, if I could. Or I can motion first and
Yeah, why don't you make the motion first?
Great.
And then,
I want to make a motion to continue the membership of Ali Faki on our Development Review Board. The community would not be better served by the loss of this valuable volunteer member who is neither unwilling nor unable to serve, but has simply had a few unexpected life events that arose. May I say a few other words, or do we want to take a vote first?
Well,
Okay.
you said to continue but would you repeat that again?
The motion?
Yes, please.
I want to make a motion to continue the membership of Ali Faki on the Development Review Board.
And do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Thank you. We have a motion. We have a second. Now we can have some discussion.
Great. So Mr. Faki has donated his time and his professional expertise to our city for over 11 years. He has 2 master's degrees and a PhD in civil engineering. He's volunteered his free expert advice while raising a family and running a business here in our city, and we should be grateful for his service to our community. Thank you, Ali. Our boards and commissions are a great and important process of community involvement and input, as we've just seen today. An email was sent to Mr. Faki from the mayor's office demanding that he resign from the DRB immediately or appear before council for a public discussion of his removal, which we're doing today, unfortunately. Our valued board and commission members who are residents of our community should be treated as we treat anyone who interacts with this Golden Rule City, with respect, dignity, and compassion. We should be alerting a board member that there's an issue and asking if everything's okay, not simply demanding a resignation. Board and commission members are appointed by and serve at the pleasure of this entire council. One of us should not have the sole discretion in taking action to terminate a member. The rules of procedure say that after a number of absences, consideration of removal may be scheduled for council action. This is being interpreted as a mandate to remove a member without consulting the rest of this council. This process needs to be clarified and amended immediately, and we will be addressing that in our next agenda item. We have never handled an absence of a volunteer in this way in the last 20 years. This is not how professional organizations are run, and certainly not how Scottsdale should be run. Repeat, these are volunteers. Who would want to serve if this is how we are going to treat them? And so I will go back and make my motion again to continue the membership of Ali on the Development Review Board. Thank you.
So we have a motion. We have a second. Let's see if anyone, Councilmember Millhaven and then Littlefield.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to call the question according to our rules of procedure. Motion to call the question does not require a second. It is not debatable. We immediately vote. If a majority of the council votes yes, then we would immediately end all any additional discussion and move immediately to vote on the motion at the table. So I make a motion to call the question.
Second.
We have a motion to call the question. Again, there's no need for a second. And the discussion of any point is not going to be made for that reason. Let's call the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Indicate your vote. Okay. Thank you. Okay, that passed. And now we have the vote for the motion itself. No. Okay. The motion passes 6-1. Okay. Next, we will move on to the item number 19 pertaining to the rules and changes as proposed, and I will call on the excuse me, there's still a few hands up. Ms. Littlefield, did you have something? No. Okay.
I was just going to speak on the,
Okay. Then we'll go to Vice Mayor Caputi on item 19.
So this makes sense to be following the agenda item that we just had. As I said, boards and commission members are appointed by and serve at the pleasure of this entire council. And one of us should not have sole discretion in deciding to take action to terminate a member. As I said earlier, our rules of procedure say that after a number of absences, consideration of removal may be scheduled for council action. This is being interpreted as a mandate to remove members without consulting the rest of the council. And this is a decision that should be made by all of us, not just one member of this council. In every other instance, a council majority is required to put an item on the agenda under a mayor and council item. This is a special carve-out under the council code, and it doesn't make sense to have this one off. All but one of the board and commission members that have been removed over the last year either moved away from the city or they decided when asked that they had too many outside commitments to continue serving. That makes sense. If we have a member who wants to serve, but life events intervene, this should prompt a conversation, not just a simple termination or a challenge. We don't want to have volunteers step down just to avoid the embarrassment of having to come defend themselves in public. If an attendance issue arises, we need to take a look at the problem, not just rid ourselves of these valued members. I think, as the mayor mentioned, a staff liaison is now alerting the member when there's an issue, if it arises, and that's great. But if the issue continues, the council as a whole needs to be alerted of the problem so we can all make a decision about whether it merits further action. So having said that, I would like to adopt Resolution 12327 and Ordinance 4526, both of which I'm happy to read, although I'm open to conversation from the rest of the council.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, and we have Councilwoman Littlefield and myself, and then Councilwoman Whitehead.
Thank you, Mayor. The changes that we made to the ordinance were not meant to be punitive to the members of our commissions and our boards, but are meant to enable the council to receive the full benefit of each appointed member's thoughts and discussions. We cannot receive that if the members aren't there. However, life happens, and sometimes it is beyond our control. I believe that is where the council steps in to make the kinds of decisions that are before us tonight. I suggest the following addition to our ordinance, which is very much in line with Councilwoman Caputi's. Once a board or commission member has missed 2 consecutive meetings, one less than the mandate, or 3 meetings within a 6-month period, one less than the mandate, the official staff liaison shall notify the commissioner or board member in writing of his or her attendance record and remind him or her of the terms of attendance in the ordinance. Hopefully, with this reminder, they will be able to remain in compliance. These people are busy people. Often they work, they have jobs, they do a lot of other things besides volunteer on our boards and commissions. A little nudge, a little reminder is not amiss. A copy of each of such letter, written by the liaison, should also be forwarded to the mayor's chief of staff so that the mayor and the council can be kept abreast of any possible upcoming concerns. Ali Faki, and I'll just mention him here because this is what brought this all to a head, is a hard-working member of our DR board. I believe he studies each issue and he gives his honest opinion for all of us for our consideration. He and I often don't agree, especially on development issues. However, I do not want the members of our boards and commissions to simply mimic back to me what they think I want to hear. I want an honest input that I can then evaluate and use when making a final decision on this dais. I believe we get that from Mr. Faki, and at this time, I think that we should have that consideration on the changes for our ordinance so that people can be made more aware and alert, and we're not acting up here as parents, if you will. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will respond to a couple comments here. There is not a mandate for removal of someone. The reason why Mr. Faki's situation was brought here was because there was not clarity about the attendance or failure of attendance, and Mr. Faki and I had a direct talk. I worked with him 10 years ago when I was on DR board. I know Mr. Faki. We know each other. The question is whether or not there's an empty seat too many times on DR board. That standard was not set by myself. That standard has been in place for 10 years, and it had a purpose. And it's observed by 120 board and commission members. I speak again that it is pointed out, for instance, in a couple cases, there were absenteeism, and the letter was sent out, and the outreach was done by the mayor's office, as specified, and we got no response from that person. I'm not naming who it is or who they are. So, in effect, I declared the post abandoned, okay? That's abandoned because there was really no response from someone. In other cases, there was an automatic, you say abandonment or vacancy when people moved away. There again, those are things that are something that I have to keep track and someone has to keep track of in terms of performance. So there's no mandate that someone is ejected. That is incorrect. There is a discussion that we had with Mr. Faki to clarify that, and if there's a rule change, there can be rule changes. However, for instance, in the case with Mr. Faki, the motion was made to continue, but no clarification was made as far as whether he can have 3 more misses. As you've said, he'll have notice if he misses 2 consecutive under this discussion. Nothing's been adopted yet. There has been no clarification on that. It was not conditional. It was just, you shall continue, and the only requirement is, again, he could miss 4 out of 6 or 3 out of 6 over 6 months, or 3 in a row and receive a warning. So there again, that's a point of contention that as mayor, I cannot negotiate that. I heard the points of that he made, whether they're vacation, travel, work, personal. I've heard that from him as well as other people that have that I've had to contact as a courtesy. The problem when you decide to poll or decide to ask the clerk to find out what the facts are, because that's what this ordinance is requesting, that the clerk then be the investigator, that the clerk poll or contact 7 of us, that's out of the public view. That's not transparent. That's not, as far as the members of the Development Review Board or another commission may be involved, if it doesn't come to a public discussion, because then it will lead to, let's just say, a puzzlement, like, gee, how did that happen? So-and-so was gone, whether it's Mr., I'm not saying anyone in particular now, but that leads the clerk then, the way it's written, for him or her to poll us and share information. So part of my question back to Vice Mayor is, what kind of details do you expect the clerk to provide in polling? And you know, we would have to listen through that without a open deliberation.
We don't have to get into the weeds. I thought the mayor.
Okay. No, I thought the question is, what kind of polling, is that in here or not? So what kind of information would you expect the clerk to provide us in that respect?
Again, this is very standard procedure for anything else that comes up. This has already happened. This is the only carve-out where the rest of us don't get called. So I imagine that when the clerk calls us, he would say, so, you know, we've missed so many, so-and-so has missed so many meetings. Would you like to hear it as a mayor and council item? And we would say yes or no, just like we do with every other. It's come up, that's happened many times.
Well, but we have specific performance. There's 3 missed and 4 out of 6. It's already stated that way. So why would you not hear the case unless you had separate information that would not be in conference with everyone else? You'd be deciding based on a conversation with an individual
This is-
rather than finding out, that's what the tricky part of this is. We would lose the transparency because someone would be deciding whether or not based on a polling.
We can always put a mayor and council item at any point during the year if there were an issue with something that we didn't like or something that came up that we didn't agree with. Again, this is the only issue, this is the only instance in which the council doesn't get to have a say about what goes on in the mayor and council items. I don't need to get deep in the weeds tonight. I'm simply suggesting that the council be involved in this conversation.
Well, that's why it
simple as
is
that.
in a
But
conversation.
we
When
don't
it
need
comes
to-
forward,
But we need to
then we
first agree
discuss
to
it.
hear it in public, I believe, just like any other item that comes up. Why is this different?
It's important that you're saying that someone could be polled and decide not to bring it up. And it's a clear discrepancy in attendance that's mandatory for 120 commissioners, but for some reason, it's not going to be decided as a group. I'm all for deciding it as a group, but the question is whether or not it would see the light of day if someone said, well, they may have their own opinion or a sidebar.
This has never come up before.
That's why
20 years. This hasn't been an issue. I'm not sure why it's becoming an issue now.
it's an issue because I cannot just, as I said, disregard it. That's my duty. Now, in the same way, I can agree if everyone wants to know what the situation is. I don't know that that rule about notification is written in this ordinance as it is, but whether it is written or not, it still requires a full deliberation of an attendance matter that's specified in our practice. And if you want to change the rule to four misses in a row, then look at changing that. That's why this whole issue was going to come up on December 8th.
Exactly, which is why we don't need to get deep in the weeds tonight. Again, the change in the resolution and the adoption of the new ordinance are simply saying that the council needs to be aware. That's all we're asking for.
Well, it also doesn't it say about the polling or not?
Okay, I guess.
Because I remember your original motion was that.
Right, that we should be polled before it becomes an item on the mayor, like we do with every other mayor and council item. I mean, we always do this. This is how.
Well, but then there's a possibility that it would not be discussed if for some reason.
Correct, that's right, because just like tonight is a perfect example. We would have said, we don't think that we want to fire a valued volunteer. The council would have said no. We don't think that that's something that we should move forward with, and it wouldn't have been in public.
Well, that's prejudicing the discussion by saying that you are deciding not to, if you wanted, as you did, to recommend that he be continued, that's fine as well. But to say that you won't even hear it is not transparent to the public.
But we do that on every other time. I don't understand why is this different?
Because
Every
there are
other time-
there are specified requirements that this person is not performing. That's why.
Well, then we're going to have a conversation about what, as Councilwoman Littlefield made in her motion, let's make it clearer that people get alerted before we just demand their resignation. A volunteer.
I did not demand a resignation.
We all have
I
a
brought
copy
it
of the
forward
email.
that it be discussed.
Resign or come in public and defend your position.
Okay, just a second. Let's move on. Excuse me. We'll move on to Councilwoman Janik, Councilmember Durham, and then Littlefield.
I wasn't sure if someone else was ahead of me. Is Councilwoman Whitehead ahead of me in the order to speak?
Okay, I show Councilmember Durham, Councilwoman Littlefield, Councilwoman Whitehead now. So sorry, then you.
I'll go after Solange.
Mayor,
Okay.
I apologize. Councilwoman Janik was at the top of the list.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You were at the top of the list.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
All right. I do have several comments to make on this issue. First of all, what we're doing tonight is proof that the system works. We ask someone to resign because there were problems with attendance, and the mayor is directed to do that, and he did. And then it comes to us to discuss and vote on, which we did. So that part of it works quite well, and I don't see why that needs to be changed. What I would like to see changed is, number one, what Councilwoman Littlefield said, and that before the member reaches the maximum number to request a recusal, that they be notified. And then I would like to add one other thing, which is somewhat in compliance with what Council Vice Mayor Caputi wants. I think that when a letter is sent out asking for resignation, that everybody on City Council needs to be CC'd on that so that we all know what is occurring as far as our boards and commissions go. Because I feel like, to a certain extent, I was blindsided with some of the changes that happened. And then when you're questioned about it, you say, whoa, I didn't know that. That doesn't look good. But in general, I think that the system that we put in place with the directives, with the codes, the ordinances, I think it's worked. And I think this evening is proof that it works. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Durham, and then Councilwoman Littlefield.
Thank you, Mayor. This may be a question for the city attorney, but I don't understand the reason for the exception under 6.11. I mean, I agree very much with the changes to, in the ordinance 4526, that there be a notice given to all the members of the council. And it seems to me that if we add that section 2-241H, and a notice is given to all the members of the council, then under the normal provisions of 6.11, before the amendment, any one of us can ask that that be added as a mayor and council item, and it will be added if there's a vote of 4 of us. So I don't understand the reason for the exception there, because it really, it's just, I think it just kind of restates the general rule that 4 or more members may have an item added to the council meeting agenda. And with respect to the mayor's comments about whether an issue becomes public or not, I think that this sort of takes care of itself, because if 4 of us, if less than 4 of us decide that this is an issue, and that, presumably because there might be good reasons for the absence, then it seems to me that it's really not a matter which requires public attention, because then that would indicate that the majority doesn't consider it to be a major issue.
Mayor and Councilmember Durham. So there probably are a couple of different ways that the council could go about solving this issue. I wrote the ordinance and the rule change based on the council's motion at the prior meeting, and also just to try to bring more clarity to the rule. Keep in mind that right now there are 2 ways for the council to put something on the agenda. There's the mayor and council item way, which requires only 1 member of council to state in a mayor and council item that they want something on the next agenda, in which case the entire council would vote then to put it on the next agenda. And then there's the polling method. And in this situation of boards and commissions, as was previously pointed out, there is an exception that the mayor can put an item on the agenda if there's an attendance issue with a board and commission member. But that ordinance did not have the clarity that you would strive for. And so in drafting the rule change that the council wanted to consider at this meeting and the ordinance change, I think that clarity was at the top of my list. Let's not have an issue about how this is to proceed. And if the intention of the council is to not have removal of a board and commission member on an agenda unless 4 members of the council agree to that for a public discussion, then why would the council want for that to be brought up in a mayor and council item by 1 member of council? And that's the reason I wrote it the way I did, with the exception. Does that answer your question? So without that exception and with only the ordinance change, Councilmember Durham, then it would require polling of 4 members to put it on an agenda. You are correct about that. But 1 member of council would still be able to put it on as a mayor and council item. With the exception in the rule change, then it wouldn't be allowed to go on as a mayor and council item, and it could only go on if 4 members of the council agreed to put it on in a poll. So it's the preference of this council how they would like to handle it, but that was my interpretation of the council's intention when you passed your previous motions.
Okay, so you're saying that under 6.11, any one of us can add an item to the agenda, but it takes 4 votes to agendize it for a future meeting.
No, I'm saying any single member of council could bring it up under mayor and council items, and then you would have to vote to put it on a future agenda,
Right,
a 2-step process.
Right.
Or any member of council could ask for a poll, and it would take 4 to agree to put it on an agenda.
But either way, you've got to have 4 votes to put it on an agenda.
Yes, but one of those is a poll without the council talking to one another
Right.
privately,
Right.
and one is public.
Okay.
And so that was just my interpretation of the motion that was made at the prior meeting and how that would best be memorialized in a rule change or in an ordinance change. But certainly that can be amended. It can't be amended with an intention. It has to be amended with specific language if we were to amend that tonight. But there is more than one way to handle it. So if the council wanted any single council member to be able to add the removal of a board and commission member as a mayor and council item for the council to discuss in a public meeting, then all you would need to do is strike that exception from the resolution
Okay.
in an amendment.
Okay, I understand. I'm not sure I want that. I'm just thinking out loud. I think I probably would not want it agendized unless there was a vote of 4 or more.
When you say vote of 4 or more, if I can clarify, are you talking about the poll? Because the poll is not a vote.
Yes, I think if I had my preference, it's Councilmember Caputi's motion originally, but if I had my preference, I think I would probably not put that on an agenda unless there was a poll of 4 or more.
So that's why we have the exception.
Okay.
Okay, Councilwoman Little, I'm sorry, were you concluded? Were you concluded?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Councilwoman Littlefield and then Councilwoman Whitehead.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I just want to reiterate a little bit here. My goal in making these suggestions to change our ordinance was to not have some of this happen, to catch the problem before it became a problem. And if we can notify our board members and our commissioners before they hit that line in the sand, if you will, then sometimes that will will be enough to stop the problem because they will be brought into aware of it. It's probably not something most of them think about a whole lot. Whether or not we have the liaison for each board and commission draft a letter at that point, or whether we have the chief of staff draft the letter, it can be either way, as long as they are notified before they hit that deadline. I think that's the only fair thing to do for folks. And I hope, it's my goal, to make this problem not happen as much, because people was, oh yeah, I can't do that. So, you know, maybe I'll go shopping another day, or I'll take the kids to the park another day, the next day, whatever. And I think a copy of that letter should be in the office of the chief of staff, so that the council and the mayor have notification of it ahead of time also, so it doesn't blindside us up here on the dais. So that's the reasoning that I'm trying to say we should amend this ordinance a little bit to make it so that all of us are better informed and know what's going on before it kind of comes up to us. And as I say, I don't think the changes that the council wanted to make on the ordinance are meant to be punitive. They're meant to enable us as a council to receive the best and most complete information from all of our appointed board members and commissioners that we can get before we make decisions on issues that come before us. I think that that's important, but I don't want to be the teacher with the whip here or with the stick, because that's not the intention of this at all. So I just wanted to make that very clear. Thank you.
Let's go to City Attorney and then Councilwoman Whitehead.
Mayor, my apologies. I turned my button on and I forgot to turn it back off.
Okay. Let me give a little filler here. The situation with item 18 and item 19, the specific case with Mr. Faki, as I said, was handled consistently with the knowledge and discussion that ensued in this discussion for 19. And the option to resign, it was never a mandatory thing. It's in the same way that the actions of the person who may have been absent too many times precipitated the whole question to begin with. So that's an option. It's not a demand, and it's not mandatory. The question that's being pushed tonight is, how can this be clarified better? And if so, is the bar going to be reduced or changed substantially beyond the 3 misses in a row and 4 out of 6? Because what's going to happen if we don't have a conclusion of that discussion, such as you get two more misses or we just restart the clock again, if that question isn't answered, then it leads to, in my opinion, more confusion for the 120 commissioners that are going to say, gee, I guess more misses are possible, and who is really enforcing the whole thing? So part of what I'm hearing is that Councilwoman Littlefield is saying, hey, we may be able to be a little more notifying, I guess, to the individual. Well, I can tell you every commissioner gets the digital copy a week or 10 days before. They know where they're supposed to be on such and such a date. Every commission's minutes say you were absent or so-and-so was absent the previous 2 meetings. It's very clear because the clerk's job is very clear. They just record who's there and also who comes later. So this is not a question of whether or not somebody is valuable and so forth. This is a question of whether or not the panel is complete, and this is why this subject will be revisited on some of the rules as scheduled on December 8th. That's the way we're going to roll with this, and it's not an intent. I am no way, just to be clear, do I have any unilateral power to, that wouldn't be occurring as a full council. And that's why this also has come forward. Councilwoman Whitehead, and then I need to clarify if there are some modifications on the published ordinance. Go ahead, Councilwoman Whitehead.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so I think what we have here is bureaucracy, added bureaucracy without clarity at the end of the day. And I seconded the motion to get this on tonight's agenda. But we have a new mayor, a new council relatively, and some very old rules with a lot of holes in them, a lot of uncertainties. So I guess my preference would be to wait for the December 8th meeting. I think we need to clarify. We had questions on another commissioner previously, so I think we need to clarify the rules. And once those rules are clear, and once the notifications of our commissioners have been restated and we have a consistent process that we all agree on, then we consider whether or not it really should add this bureaucracy of polling council. Now, should we all be notified? I agree with council. I think Councilwoman Littlefield and I think Councilwoman Janik said it. Yeah, I think we need to be in the loop so that we're not blindsided. But if the rules are clear, if the rules are good, then I don't really see a need. I'm with Councilwoman Littlefield. I have a feeling we're not going to be here again with this problem, but we'll want to have a more efficient way of dealing with it. But I don't want to hodgepodge this process. I just think I want to wait till 12/8. I'm not going to support this.
Therefore, do I hear that as a motion to continue? Because I would second that motion to continue this and wrap it into the December 8th when there are a host of other issues regarding membership. So I second. Is there any discussion about a continuance, or would you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine. I'm fine making, again, I was the person who seconded this item to get it on tonight's agenda, but I think I'm comfortable saying this is getting a little more complicated, and I think that there's a lot of support for what's in this ordinance, but I would like it to be postponed until 12/8, continued until 12/8, so I will make that a motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second by myself. Any other discussion on the continue this for more fact-finding?
Are
Go ahead.
we continuing item number 18?
19.
Or 19?
Just 19.
Just 19?
Just 19.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Vice Mayor Caputi, then Councilmember Millhaven, and Littlefield just spoke. Vice Mayor Caputi.
I want to reiterate, I don't think this is making anything complicated at all. If everyone has read my motion, I simply am asking that we all get notified, rather than a board and commission member getting an email that says, Mayor Ortega asks that you resign. I would just simply just like we do with every other mayor and council item, I would just have liked Ben to have called us all and said, this is something that came up. Would you like to see it on an agenda? That's all. It's consistency. This is the only carve-out we have on this one item. I'm not asking for details or how many misses or when we should be notified, simply asking it to be brought in line with every other item that we do. That's all.
Councilwoman.
It's not bureaucracy.
Excuse me.
Less
All right,
bureaucracy.
I thought when you said that's all. Okay. So Councilmember Millhaven, and then Councilwoman Littlefield, Councilwoman Whitehead.
So if I'm understanding, the mayor wants to reserve the right to threaten board and commission members between now and December with an email that says resign or risk public humiliation, which saddens me. When I read the rules of procedure and the ordinances around boards and commissions, I had a lengthy conversation with the city attorney where the procedures say may schedule for consideration. I interpreted that to mean poll the council to see if we want to talk about it in a public meeting. The city attorney said no. Her interpretation was that gave the mayor had sole discretion to put it on the agenda, and that our only recourse as a council was to clarify the ordinance. And that's what I see here. I don't think we're overcomplicating anything. The only way any council member can put something on the agenda is if 4 of us agree to do that, and that is simply what we're doing here. If we need to make some other changes, that's fine. I think that by continuing this, we are endorsing the mayor threatening citizens who've dedicated their time and talent to this community. I take great offense that the email says you must resign or be brought up in front of a public meeting. That's not what the rules of procedure
I would like to
say.
call the question.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will call the question. All in favor? There's no need for discussion. That would end the, no, call the question is to end the debate and not discuss whether certain aspirations.
Asking what was she calling? What's being called?
The call the question means that we will vote without
On
further.
what?
Yes, the motion to continue.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, the motion to continue, because there are so many loose ends on this thing. And also, I believe you're mischaracterizing what was said. So we call the question, there's no discussion. All in favor of calling the question, which is meaning that we will have a vote on the continuance. Okay. The question's carried. We will now vote on to continue and refine the to December 8th, when other matters, including the boards and commission, will be decided. You will now place your vote to continue this to the set date as scheduled. Yes is carried, 4 yes to 2 no's. Sorry, 5 yeses, 2 no. And with that, we will move on to our next, discussion, which is whether or not there are any mayor or council items. Are there any mayor and council items? Woman Littlefield.
I'm sorry, Mayor, I'm confused. We voted to continue the discussion for the ordinance, and has 18 been voted on regarding?
Oh, yes, 18 was already.
I don't want to hold that.
He's continuing on his, he was,
Okay.
yeah.
So that's
Correct.
done, okay.
Correct. Okay, seeing none of mayor and council items, I will next move to public comment, which is the opportunity for someone to come forward. I see none, I hear none, therefore I will close public comment. At this point, we're going to move to study session next. Okay. So at this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. I hear one from Councilwoman Littlefield. Second, if you wish to adjourn, please register your vote. Thank you. Very well, we are adjourned, and we will reconvene as a study session in 10 minutes. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I will call to order the work study session for November 9th. The purpose of this work study is to take a subject and speak freely and openly, but not, I repeat, not take a vote on this, just to give the staff and others a sense of the issues and timing on those issues. In order to move forward, we do allow public comment, and the public comment is to be time efficient. We ask for members of the public to come forward and speak to the item which is on the agenda, and then we will proceed to do our business in consideration of the topic. In that way, the public can be heard. We ask for a maximum of 5 participants, and 3 minutes, allowing 3 minutes for that public comment. I do have a list requested, and we would begin, the topic is short-term rentals, and we can have that topic, the public comment after the presentation. Okay, let's do it before. We're going to do it before, and with that, I would call forward Mr. Jerome Landau, and please, his wife, okay, please. Just, announce yourself, thank you, yourself, your address, and then certainly we're here to listen, thank you.
Okay, first you want our address. Linda Ambrose is my name. How's that?
Better.
Ooh. Linda Ambrose is my name, and we live at 28700 North Hayden Road, Scottsdale, 85266. Okay, tell me when I begin. Okay. Greetings, Honorable Council, Mayor, and Mr. Brent Stockwell. I am Linda Ambrose, and my husband, who will be following me, is Jerome Landau. We are a married couple in our 70s and only one of many with similar stories. Our introduction with summary letter sent to each of you last Thursday, November 4th, better tells our story of being Scottsdale residents since the early 1990s, then building our extra casita for my mother in 1995 to live in until her death from Alzheimer's at 87 years old. Whereupon, years later, we began to rent her detached casita as a vacation short-term rental in order to help provide the extra income that was needed to cover the empty and aging casita's maintenance and deterioration repair expenses. We found that decision to rent contributed to a win-win situation for everyone involved. Number one, to us, aiding in our financial needs and providing us the enjoyment of being hosts and hostess to many happy and pleased Scottsdale visitors. 2, to Scottsdale winter visitors who wanted more than a hotel yet not a resort, thus providing them more variety of options. 3, to Scottsdale itself, adding to the coffers of many Scottsdale businesses, restaurants, and the like, as well as to the city's revenue from increased sales taxes, not forgetting the added taxes paid by we short-term rental owners to the city of Scottsdale County and state. But all that win-win went away. Very suddenly, in July 2021, we received a most threatening letter from a City of Scottsdale inspector calling it a compliance order, which essentially ordered that we had 1 week to take our mom's casita rental off VRBO because we must either rent our entire property, that is to say, move ourselves, or not at all. It also indicated that noncompliance would risk fines of $2,500 a day, along with potential criminal violations. Not only was this a tremendous gut punch, it hurt that our beloved Scottsdale City would resort to such mean tactics and threats. Plus, it just made no sense. We know that Scottsdale markets our city to attract visitors who need a variety of options for their visits, especially those with families and their animals. That variety of options needs to include vacation short-term rental casita homes with property owners living in their own homes on that same land. Why? because the majority of property owners who are present on their property are responsible Scottsdale citizens who do not want large crowds or abusive and loud renters at their vacation rentals or in their neighborhoods. We are not absentee landlords. We are present and interacting, supervising owners, and we should be encouraged rather than penalized and denied. I will end with a question for you. Why does it even matter that our Casita rental is detached? Thank you for your time. Did I do it?
Thank you. You certainly did. And we have Jerome Landau, spouse and husband, coming up next.
Thank you all. Linda said win-win, win-win-win. For the city of Scottsdale, she mentioned for we citizens who are residents here, who live on properties, this is really an important issue for us because so many of us, we've been here 27 years, built or bought property that had a separate small building that's being called a casita. It was pre-planning for our parents. Linda mentioned her mother who moved in with us and spent a number of years in excellent health and then a number of years experiencing dementia, Alzheimer's, and I must say those were the best years of my life to have her there, to be there with her, and to have her be able to sit in her comfort and grace to look out on the desert until her passing. So many of us then had those parents of ours as we age into passing themselves. And all over the city, there are a number of properties where property owners live there and they have a casita that now cannot be rented. Tremendous expenses come up even when it's emptied between the expenses for casita, for our own homes, for our own lives nowadays. A lot of us are struggling. Social Security does not cover enough. So that's the side for we citizens and where the win is for us by changing the code as it is now. But for Scottsdale visitors, they need an option. The option, one side is to go to one of our grand internationally known resorts where they can be in a resort room, where they can be around a lot of excitement and like that we find with resorts and people sometimes look for. But the other side is visitors sometimes want to come for their holidays, their peaceful vacations, to be able to be quiet, to go around the city, to play golf, to hike, to bike, to do all of the city's activities, and yet to be able to come home to a little bit of peacefulness and quiet without a maddening crowd. The other side, we market. We have Mayo, we have Honor Health, we have a large number of very renowned hospitals and clinics. People want to come for that. They're either going to the hospital and their spouse needs a place to stay, or they're coming for cancer treatments and the like. And as one gentleman who was a friend of ours who came to visit said, you cannot put on shorts and be outside in a hotel when you have a tube coming down from a colostomy bag. You can't do that. But to be in a private home, in our private residence, while we're going through these treatments, you can. And it's peaceful, and it's quiet, and it's special. So we need to have those options for people who are coming to Scottsdale also. Friends, I'm speaking on behalf of many people, many of us seniors who have casitas. And while we are still able to walk around, those who we plan these casitas for are no longer able to, as Linda said, her mom at 87. This is a serious issue. I understand that there have been problems with a very small number of vacation rentals, and the city and the police are on top of that and will come up with other ways of doing it also. But for we, who have been here 27 years, we've worked on your committees over the years. We've put in lots of time because this is our city. I don't want to move, but in actuality, it's getting difficult to support everything that's going on at the property and just life. And so to be able to have a short-term rental in our casita where we are living 50 feet away, maybe 150 feet away. We're there, we know these people. I used to chair a medical foundation. These kind of people do not want to be in a hotel with a minibar. They want to be in a small house with a full refrigerator where they can sit back on a patio and experience themselves, their healing and peacefulness while they're here in Scottsdale. This is the incentive. And by cutting down, I heard from someone else, they've been forced to find a rental with their family. They weren't our guests in Phoenix because they've heard that Scottsdale is cutting out all vacation rentals. Thank you for the time. Thank you for your considerations. And it's very serious for a lot of people, as well as the city. We're going to lose a lot of guests that are going to go over to the other side of that border. Be well, God bless, and blessed holidays. And thank you for your help.
Thank you for your courtesy. Next, we will have in person Sonny Kirkland. Kirtley.
Good evening, council members. My name is Sonny Kirkland. I'm here as representative of the COGS, Coalition of Greater Scottsdale Board of Directors. You know, you just say short-term rental in any community conversation, and whoa, you have to back up because here come the complaints. Nuisance parties, inappropriate behavior, trash, someone knocking at your door in the middle of the night, wrong house. But tonight, I want to talk to you about short-term rentals that is of value to our own permanent residents. We have to take a look at people who will rent their casitas and guest homes in a responsible way. You know, of council members and anyone who's lived here a long time, always casitas and how guest houses have been rented. They've always been rented. Someone comes for the Raven Horse Show, they come for Barrett Jackson. As mentioned here, they come and they stay for a week, a month, sometimes from Thanksgiving to Easter. Thank you very much for the tourism. But the point is, these are responsible short-term rentals from a week to months to many, many months. So the question is, what's happened? Whoa, the shock that Linda mentioned. She gets a violation. All of a sudden, our guest house renters who are staying in their own main house are violating an ordinance that's been on the books a long time, but it hasn't been enforced. So what's that rule? Is Elmo on? Thank you. Very simply, this is the current zoning. A guest house shall not be rented or offered for rent independent of the main house. So COGS broached this with the wonderful team that you've got working on short-term rentals, and here's the response. That the guest house would then change it into being a multi-family use. Well, I submit to you that the public looks at the current situation of short-term weekend rentals and say, hey, wait a minute, isn't that commercial use in a residential neighborhood without hotel requirements of safety, sprinklers, and health certifications and so on? So multifamily use, as they correctly say, would require a new text amendment. Well, we have a suggestion. It is so simple. How about wording the detached guest home may be rented when the owners occupy the main building? Simple, very simple. A text amendment to the current ordinance. And what would be the advantages? We picked up 3 right away. Public safety issue is reduced to near zero with the requirement of the owner being there. Police will talk about the thousands of complaints that have happened on those little weekenders where the whole property is rented. Fairness is established. Why should our zoning ordinance give preference to those very short weekend holiday short-term rental property owners and disallow any guest house rental opportunity for our permanent residents. And then the last thing, many winter visitors are accustomed to the guest house rental option. Let's give them that. So, as Cogs would say, let's get the text amendment, get it drafted, get it approved. Let's get on with it. Thank you.
Thank you. We had 3 in person. I don't see any notification for remote. Hey, I should point out that we have a full council. I should have asked Clerk Ben Lane to take our roll call, but we will note that we are in a full session. So my apologies for that. At this point, we will have the staff presentation of the work study discussion.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Brent Stockwell. I'm one of the Assistant City Managers here, and I am the team leader for your short-term rentals team. And what we want to do now is, if I can... So, as has already been mentioned, we started this process in earnest back in March when the council asked that a working group be formed to look at this issue. The working group was formed. 2 of your members, council members Janik and Millhaven, served on that group. They met 6 times, heard from nearly 100 residents, received a bunch of emails about that, had lots of deliberations, came up with 9 recommendations to you. The July 1st meeting, council members Janik and Millhaven made a presentation to you, and you unanimously adopted or accepted those recommendations and directed us to go out and work on them and come back to you with quarterly updates. And that's why we're here tonight. Because this is the first quarterly update, we wanted to take a little bit of time to familiarize you with what we've been doing and the resources that we have available. We also, Management Associate to the City Manager, Shane Stone, the voice that you usually hear introducing remote callers to you. You'll see him in person, and he's going to walk you through the report that we have out on the website. Anyone can find it by going to ScottsdaleAZ.gov and searching short-term rentals, and the report's there. It's on the right side of the page. It's the 4th box down. It says Quarterly Report. And after that, then Deputy City Attorney Luis Santea is going to come up and walk through the recommended changes to the vacation rental ordinance and the nuisance parties and unruly gatherings ordinance, get your feedback on that, and then we would like to bring those back for adoption at one of your December meetings so that they would take effect 30 days later in early January in time for high season. And then I'll come back and then I'll talk you through 3 issues that we're still working through and want to get your feedback on. And the last of those 3 issues is the issue that you had heard mentioned by Ms. Ambrose and Mr. Landau and Dr. Kirtley. So we do have that kind of set for the time tonight. And I do want to also recognize that there are a number of staff that are part of the core team that are here tonight. So if you have specific questions about police response, Assistant Chief Rich Slavin is here, about the business regulation work that we've been doing. Business Services Manager Whitney Hitt, Business Services Director Whitney Pitt is here. As I mentioned, Deputy City Attorney Luis Santea is here, and then also Public Affairs Manager Holly Walter is here if we want to talk through how we're handling some of the outreach on that. So I'm going to step down, let Shane Stone take over, and then I'll be back to join you later in the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent. And good evening, Mayor Ortega and members of the City Council. I'm Shane Stone, Management Associate to the City Manager. Let me click into this report right here. So following Brent's navigation there, if you search short-term rentals on ScottsdaleAZ.gov, it brings you to this website. And just as he mentioned, Scottsdale Short-Term Rental Quarterly Report. And if I could get some zoom on that, please, just enough to make that text a little larger. Thank you. Perfect. So when you go to that report, this is what you'll see initially. It's the name of the report and a creation date for the report. If we could zoom out, I think just one click there just to make sure I get everything in there. Sorry about that. We're having some keyboard issues down here at the podium. But you'll see that the date on the report is November 8th, yesterday, which reminds me there are some slight differences between this report and what you may have seen in your packet. You should have a printed copy there on the dais, and we just added some additional points of data to make sure it's perfectly up to date. So as we scroll through this report, the first thing that we see is the objective, which is the council-approved priority that's in the organization's strategic plan, and that is to improve resident livability in Scottsdale neighborhoods, review the working group recommendations to improve short-term rental monitoring and enforcement, and implement changes to reduce complaints by 50%. And if we scroll down just a little bit further, you'll see in this white box the first staff-submitted update that highlights where these recommendations came from, lists the 9 recommendations individually, and notes that they are listed as initiatives within this plan and shown below with regular updates. So the first initiative here, or recommendation from the short-term rental working group, was to improve enforcement against properties who regularly violate our ordinances. Staff has continued to evaluate potential demands, future demands on staffing, especially in the areas of the police department, code enforcement, and the city attorney's office. We are evaluating collaboration between the Citizen Services Call Center and 911 to make sure we're routing calls appropriately. Business Services has been focusing on following up with short-term rental properties, reviewing 3,500 listings, and delivering 2,000 letters seeking their voluntary compliance. And the police department, we know, has responded to more than 1,700 calls for service to short-term rental properties over the last 2 years. And in the next 12 to 18 months, they'll be installing a new records management system, which will give us even better, richer data on the responses to short-term rental properties to best inform future staff needs for a response team. So moving through, we go to recommendation number 2, which was to work with the short-term rental industry to increase properties providing that emergency contact information and to ensure we're receiving input from the industry. Prior to implementing any recommendations, we've met with representatives from several short-term rental companies about potential updates to the city code and to discuss compliance issues that we've run into. Between the adoption of these recommendations and the end of September, so just in that quarter, thanks to the legwork of Business Services, we were able to get contact information for more than 384 short-term rental properties. Recommendation number 3, which is highlighted there on the screen, is to use technology to identify and increase emergency contacts and compliance from short-term rental properties. I'm happy to share with you we've contracted for use of the Rentalscape technology to identify short-term rental properties and to help automate our outreach to those short-term rental property owners and hosts to make sure we're gathering contact information and they're paying the taxes that they should be paying. Just as another highlight on a data point, I shared with you that 384 number. Over this calendar year, because of Business Services, more than 700 new properties have provided their emergency contact information to the city. Moving to recommendation 4, to ensure that we're collecting all allowable revenue. What we've done so far is gone through this manually with Business Services. They've reviewed the listings to make sure that there is a transaction privilege tax or TPT number on file with the Arizona Department of Revenue. And we're seeking voluntary compliance, and if we don't get that, we have filed verified violations with ADOR. And the technology solution that I mentioned, Rentalscape, is going to help us there as well, indirectly by identifying those properties that, identifying more short-term rental properties to make sure we're just verifying that TPT number, and also by giving us a scope for how much short-term rental activity there is in the city as a whole, so we can at least estimate how much underreporting there may be and how many revenues we may be losing there. Recommendation 5 is to strengthen the Scottsdale's ordinances to eliminate loopholes and improve the ability to enforce. Those draft ordinances are in your packet, but Deputy City Attorney Luis Santeo will be covering those, so we'll save that for him. And then recommendations 6, 7, and 8, which I'm not able to get all on the same screen at the same time, are all related to communications. So Initiative 6, or Recommendation 6, is about widespread communication. So we are developing an overview article for wide distribution. Recommendation 7 is about empowering neighborhoods to help manage this situation. We've already hosted 2 neighborhood college sessions related to short-term rentals with a combined total of 78 participants, and we'll host more of those as demand necessitates it. And recommendation 8 is about developing best practices for residents, owners, and hosts, and so we're developing guidebooks for each of those groups of stakeholders. The final recommendation is Initiative 9, which is to share information with the state about how we're using the tools already available to us and to advocate for necessary changes in state law to return some of that local control on this issue. As you're all aware, when this was drafted, a letter was under review to be sent to local legislators and legislative leaders, but you all have signed that letter and it's already been sent out today. And we are also preparing for the upcoming legislative session by meeting with various stakeholders, and this will be included on at least the draft legislative agenda, which will be presented to council in December. Also in this report, beyond those textual updates, we have some data points to provide some context to what we've been working on, but also to just the situation on the ground. The first of those are the number of short-term rental requests through our resident request platform, ScottsdaleAZ. And you can see that over the years we were hovering in the teens or the 20s with requests related to short-term rentals. But with the working group, we saw that number greatly increase up to a high of 72 in June of this year. And those were people just filing a request that they had an issue with a short-term rental. The next measure I want to highlight are the nuisance party police service fees assessed. And this includes all property short-term rentals and otherwise. These are the fees that are assessed when police have to continuously go out and respond to nuisance parties. That hovers from $500 up to more than $13,000 in a given month. And this doesn't reflect fees which were later rescinded or reduced through the legal process, but just gives an understanding of the sincerity of the issue there. Next, we have short-term rental code enforcement complaints, and these are specifically complaints on properties that are otherwise failing to comply with generally applicable laws or are using the property for non-residential use, such as hosting events, weddings, and other similar things. And again, we see kind of a hover in the 30s and 40s until the short-term rental working group really created a buzz around this issue. And we had 175 such complaints in June, 77 complaints in July. So then we have the short-term rental properties police calls for service. These are all calls for service to short-term rental properties. Here you can see the seasonality that in those spring months when there are a lot of events going on, we have likely more short-term rental activity and certainly more calls for service to short-term rental properties. We had a peak in May of 2020 at 109, and then another peak in 2021 in both March and April at 112 calls for service per month. The most recent month, shown here in September, had 44 calls for service. And this next data point reflects the short-term rental properties providing emergency contact information to the city. So these are every month new properties sharing their contact information. The big number on the left, 212, is when this initially went into effect. A lot of properties registering, not a whole lot of activity necessarily, hovering between 20 and 60 any given month. And then business services made a concerted effort, and you see that reflected over this past summer with 142 up to 205 in July. And with the Rentalscape technology, we do expect to see, again, more properties registering. So now I want to go into revenues, and I do want to preface this next piece with this includes both the privilege or sales tax and the occupancy bed tax. That bed tax is 50% of that goes to destination marketing, and the other half is earmarked for tourism-related expenses to be made by the city. But here we see some of the growth of short-term rental properties, of the prevalence of using short-term rentals, and the seasonality, because we had a peak in, I believe it's March of 2019, with $688,000 of revenues related to short-term rentals, then a bit of a valley through the warmer months, back up to $956,000 at the beginning of 2020 in January, before obviously that dropped off with the pandemic, down below $160,000. But as it came back, we saw more than $1.2 million in revenue, and that was here in March of 2021. A bit of a drop for the summer months when it was awfully warm outside, but back up to $851,000 of revenue in September. And as a final measure to share with you, this is short-term rentals as a percentage of total short-term stay revenues. So that is, if you were to ask, okay, we have short-term rentals as well as hotels, motels, resorts, all of the revenue we're collecting from those, what percentage of that comes from what we would call short-term rental properties? And the answer back in 2018 routinely was less than 10%. We've seen that continue to grow as they take a bit more of that market share. And we had a peak with 39% in March of 2020, which coincided with the pandemic, and then 45% in January of 2021. But this shows that continued growth of short-term rental properties, generally speaking, and our most recent number was 26% in September of 2021. So that concludes the publicly available report that I wanted to share with you, and I will now turn it over to Deputy City Attorney Luis Santea. Thank you.
Let's take this piece by piece. So at this point, if council have any comments, I see Councilwoman Whitehead, and then we'll go to the next piece and comment on that. Do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, very nice report, Shane. Thank you. So I'm just unclear. I'm glad we're seeing the numbers of registrations go up and that you've hired this Rentalscape. How many total registrations do we have of short-term rentals? Do you have that number handy? Or does anybody? No? That's fine.
Mayor Ortega, Councilmember Whitehead, and members of the City Council, thank you for that question. I believe we are pulling that number up. I know we're about 1,300.
Okay. Do we have an estimate of how many we have here?
So thank you for that question. I've heard that ranges within that number, but it's generally in the 4,000 to 5,000 range is what I've heard.
And so at what point in time does Rentalscape give us a time frame of when we will have, a more significant portion?
Yeah, mayors, members of the council, member Whitehead. So let me clarify a little bit of that. So Shane's correct. The number that we've gotten so far is about 1,300. And there is a range of what we've heard. Generally, we'll hear, and from MAG, we heard there was about 4,300 in the city. For the Rentalscape technology, we just got access to that last week. And what that will tell us is not only how many different units that are advertising, but also how many listings there are. And we don't even have our kickoff meeting with them till next Monday, so it's very preliminary. But in general, when we've talked to them or other providers, that it's anticipated that through a concerted effort like this, that we could get up to about 85% through a concerted effort in the first year. So I think it's reasonable to think that we could, if we have 4,500 in the city, that we could get up in the 3,000 range or higher within the first year of doing that. So that's certainly kind of the target that we're working for. But when we have that tool and have it really tested, we'll have a better information and can probably give you a better estimate on that for the next quarter.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think the key to that is we just got this yesterday or whatever it was, so got it. Thank you so much for your work.
While you're up there, I just want to clarify a couple things. So the bed tax and other, could you just clarify to us whether the bed tax comes directly to us and where the reporting is to the state? So we're discussing two areas. One is how many have registered with the state of Arizona, and then of course we're searching out those that have not to find out our own numbers. And just go into that a little bit for clarity.
Sure. Mayor, members of the council, Mayor Ortega, I'm going to take a stab at this, but I realize that this is a financial area, and so I may say something that either the city treasurer or the business services director needs to weigh in. But let me talk about this in general. So the information that is on here are all of the non-hotel related revenues that are remitted to the city of Scottsdale by the state of Arizona. And it is a separate thing, the number that are registered with us and the number that have transaction privilege tax licenses with the state of Arizona. It's also more complicated because although they have to have individual licenses for each property, the online lodging marketplaces, which is the state of Arizona's term for Airbnb or Expedia Vrbo, they can remit them all at one time for all of the ones that are on there. So that makes it somewhat complicated to have the nexus between those two things. But we are hopeful that once we really have the Rentalscape up and running, as Shane mentioned earlier, that we'll have a much better sense of how much we probably should have collected based on what's out there on the platforms and how much was actually collected and sent in. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and when I testified to the legislature, and in regard to actual registrations with the tax privilege license at the state, I learned that the state, are not enforcing the registration, or it would be so-called self-reporting by a property. So the state does not necessarily have any enforcement resources allocated to validate it. At that time, last April, we were told there were only about 600 in Scottsdale registered through the state. Now, that seemed to have spurred on more disclosure, but it's my understanding, again, when we track this down, that the state, unless the state allocates resources to track it down, we're trying to get a step ahead of it, but if the state doesn't do it themselves, then we have a big unknown factor in terms of actual number and whether or not they're remitting at all to the state. I just want to clarify that. I think you're doing the best effort, and I know that our budget recently allocated a person to pursue this that resulted in several notifications of properties that were posted on the platforms but may not have been registered with the city. Can you just explain that real briefly of what the registration with the city of Scottsdale, what that entails?
Yeah, so Mayor and members of the council, Mayor Ortega, so yes, there has to be a law, and then you actually have to enforce the law. And so what business services did is the city treasurer worked with the business services director to assign 2 of the employees part-time to looking at these registrations, to identify the registrations, and also to check their websites to make sure that they are complying with state law and the city ordinance requirements to put their actual license number on that. So they're doing the work on that, and code enforcement had done it before it. But when they notice that someone is not registered and they don't have that, then they are filing a verified violation with the Arizona Department of Revenue, which is our obligation to do. The other side of the equation is that the Department of Revenue then actually has to do something with it. We've been given the indication that they don't plan to do anything with it. But the most important thing is that we're trying to use all the resources that we have to get people to list their contact information and make sure they put their TPT license on there. So we can actually use the technology that we've acquired to be able to double check that and cross check that. And I think that's going to dramatically increase the likelihood that properties that are advertising within the city of Scottsdale are also paying their sales tax and transaction occupancy tax to the state of Arizona.
Thank you. We do want to cover these section by section, and I will ask to move to the next section as planned. Councilwoman Whitehead is blinking.
Well, I was blinking, yeah. Well, I just want to make sure I understood this, the second part of what you said, that you report, if you find a short-term rental that's not registered, you report it to the Department of Revenue, and you said they are not going to do anything with it? Explain that to me, sorry.
Yeah, Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember White, let me try that one more time. So we are notifying them that they have to provide their contact information to the city, and we are following up on that. At the same time, we are also, when we notice that it's not on the website and they haven't been responsive, we're also filing the paperwork that the state requires through the process to notify the Department of Revenue that they have more than 300 properties in Scottsdale that are advertising for their properties for short-term rental, and they're not listing a tax number. That does not necessarily mean that they don't have a tax number. They're just saying that they don't have it. And Business Services is going through the work to try and identify that before they do that. So
Business Services can go after them and get the taxes. We don't need the Department of Revenue? No, we cannot.
I'm going to call.
Okay,
Business
I'll wait.
Services.
I'll wait till that next section. Thank you.
We'll have Whitney Pitt, the Business
Okay.
Services Director, come up, but she can clarify that point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brent did a great job for the most part on all of that. And really the only other two parts I can add to that, no, ADOR does collect on our behalf. The one thing that I will add is we are sending out 2 letters. So we give them a courtesy heads up of a couple things. So we've reached out to, like they mentioned, almost 3,000 identified short-term rentals. Of those 3,000, we've gotten many calls. And we send a first letter letting them know either, hey, please give us your contact information, or you're not listing your TPT with your advertisement, or we've identified that you are a potential short-term rental and we don't see you on our ADOR website, our software that we're able to access to see that you have a TPT listing. Those people either contact and say, hey, take us off your list. We definitely don't have a short-term rental. You're wrong. We update that. Or the opposite, they call and let us know, I had no idea, please inform me, we educate them. If we don't hear after the first letter, about 30 to 45 days after that, we've sent a second letter, and at that point, if we still don't hear another 30, 45 days, we are completing a verified violation with ADOR. And ADOR at that point hasn't given us specifics of what they will do with the verified violation. We have reached out to them and they let us know that to submit them, here's how to submit them. We have been doing it. Like Brent said, we have close to 300 that we're already planning on that we haven't got responses for whatever it may be, and that number could continue to grow. But at this point, we're waiting for ADOR for next steps.
And so just to be clear, if we want taxes, we need ADOR to take action.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Any other questions about that? Business regulations. Great.
Thank you very much. I see no other hands up from the council. We'll move to the next section.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Luis Santea. I'm a Deputy City Attorney, and I'm here to talk to you about the proposed ordinances. Prior to doing that, I did want to mention that we do have some additional tools that we can use beyond sending letters for people that don't put their tax license on their advertisement or don't provide us their emergency contact or complaint information. We can ultimately follow that up with either a long-form civil citation, and we are exploring that with Business Services at that point. So there's more than just reporting to ADR that we can do. So now going back to the ordinances, there are 2 ordinances that we're talking about tonight. One is 4527. That's an amendment to the short-term vacation rental ordinance. That's the limited stuff that the state allows us to regulate. And what we're proposing to change is the emergency contact portion of the ordinance, with the requirement that an emergency contact has to respond to a public safety emergency physically at the location within 1 hour, and their consequences to that emergency contact or the owner if that fails to happen. We have received some feedback from the industry that they don't like that provision. They want to be able to text or phone us, but we think the physically responding is important because that person, that owner of that property, or that emergency contact, that agent can help control their guests, can help public safety, the police specifically, deal with the occupants. It also puts some skin in the game in the sense that they're now and they're present and they're allowing this nuisance party to go forward, and that it helps the police use some additional enforcement tools. So basically in the ordinance, it's amending to have that 1 hour requirement. It defines what an emergency is, which is any time public safety personnel
police, other first responders, fire have to respond to a call for service at that location, and it would include nuisance parties and unruly gatherings. In the ordinance itself, and Kelsey, perhaps you could put page 13 up of the ordinance. Thank you.
Okay, any comments thus far? And I just want to clarify in terms of the possible ordinance example that we're just leaning into right now. When first responders, whether police or fire, have to respond and there is an unknown occupant, for instance, as we just said, if they have not registered or are not known to us, they may be a LLC in China or New York or somewhere, and that is it's more than a distraction. Typically, your police and fire want to know or have an idea if there's a domestic situation or perhaps violence or so forth, and if there's no record of the occupant or unknown because the property is not attended, there's not like a hotel would have a hotel manager that might be able to direct them with a key to get into that room if there was a disturbance or whatever. So there is, when you said emergency number, there is a public interest in protecting our police and fire to know at least whether or not there is it involves a short-term rental or not. And that's why it's so important that we have that registration and those contacts, as well as some fines that could accumulate with that. If not, then we could potentially place our people in jeopardy because of not knowing who the occupants may be or the responsible party. That's one of the there are certain things that are outlined in the legislation that preempted the city from doing, but there were also some exceptions to that. That is, whether or not we could control certain ordinance areas, whether or not the purposes of the vacation, short-term rental, housing, sex offenders, operating and maintaining or selling drugs, et cetera. So there are certain things that the state has said that are in our, that they cannot preempt us from responding to, and it's actually an illegal use of a property if it was used for those purposes. And, this is another reason why the underreporting is a serious matter, I believe, and it should be addressed as well as with some escalating question. Another topic that we'll hit later is whether or not the responsible party may be even in town, or maybe a recording, maybe, who knows, whether that's an active number. So I believe that's why we need to seek that. Just to clarify, I think that's important to mention here. It's not a punitive situation so much as being responsible, and certainly the adjoining neighbors, if they file a complaint or call 911 because there's something serious going on, then the police or fire will have to respond to that situation. There's also a problem of liability and where the liability lies to manage that property correctly. And I would like to see some data on really where the ownership is, if how much of it is out of state, how much of it is conglomerate, whether or not there's a first position. I'm not asking for it tonight, but I think I really do commend the short-term rental group for identifying many of these areas. And we'll go on to the next section. Oh, excuse me, Councilman Littlefield. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dan. Turn on my. While we're talking about this, it seems to kind of fit into the question that the Landows had. you have a short-term rental, you don't know who owns it, we're trying to find the ownership, we're doing all this stuff. What is the basis for not allowing a homeowner to rent out his casita? I mean, the homeowner is right there wouldn't be any problem in locating them. And if there's a problem or an issue, and I'd just like to know what is the reasoning behind not allowing that?
So it's Mayor and members of the council. That is going to be addressed a little while later. It's a policy issue for the council to decide on what the best policy is, and it would require a text amendment of the zoning ordinance to allow that. And I think Mr. Grant is going to address the council in a little bit about that. So
Okay.
sorry to defer the question,
That's okay, thank you.
because otherwise you just get my opinion, and I don't think you want to hear that.
Your opinion is always worth.
Oh, thank you. So going back to this ordinance of 4527, so we impose two penalties. If the person is a no-show, the emergency contact is a no-show, then it's a $500 civil citation. If they show up, but they show up late, then it's a $250 citation. This ordinance, the existing ordinance, requires short-term vacation rentals to have both an emergency contact on file and a contact for complaints. The state statute that preempted us talks about those things differently. So we have demonstrable data why an emergency contact is necessary. There's been over 1,800 police calls to short-term vacation rentals through October 27th. And right now, the fine for failing to provide your emergency contact information and your complaint contact information is pretty low. It's set in the ordinance as a standard property maintenance fine. It's like $250 and can be reduced to $50 if you get that you were actually to register. Now, the city council can certainly consider, if it so desires, a higher fine for not providing your contact and emergency information or your complaint information. And I don't call it registration because we're not allowed to register rental properties, so I'm trying to be careful with my words here, because we can't license rental properties, including long-term rentals. As a general rule, any property we can find out who the owner is through the assessor's office. That doesn't necessarily tell us if it's a short-term renter, owner occupied, or long-term rental. A lot of short-term vacation rentals are probably owned by LLCs and not individual peoples. So that might be a clue that it's a commercial or an investment property. So in terms of that ordinance, I can, if anyone has any additional questions on that particular ordinance, it's just basically Ordinance 1. I can take those questions, or I can move on to the unruly party ordinance.
Thank you. I see Councilwoman Whitehead, then Vice Mayor Caputi, and then Councilmember Durham. Councilwoman Whitehead.
Yeah, I just want to weigh in. I think we should weigh in and give you some direction on that fine, of course. I mean, I think it's ridiculous that we have such a small fine for such a large consequence on our PD. And I think down the road, I'd probably want to know what the cost of those PD calls are. I'm not asking you for your opinion, but find out what the cost of those calls have been to the taxpayers. So thanks.
Vice Mayor Caputi.
I was just a teeny bit confused. Are we talking about an owner of the property needing to respond in person within an hour to a complaint?
It's not necessarily the owner, it's whoever
The emergency contact.
they've designated as emergency contact. So I could live in New Jersey, but have, John Smith be my emergency local contact who would have to respond.
Okay, yeah, because I'm just thinking, I think one of the problems with short-term rentals is that probably an owner wouldn't be within an hour to show up, so an additional loophole so we're asking that they designate a person that's within an hour of the property to be able to respond physically to a complaint.
Yes,
Okay.
Vice Mayor, that would be correct. And the person that would be responsible and receive the civil citation would be that emergency contact that doesn't fulfill their duty to show up in a timely way.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Councilmember Durham.
Thank you. Following up on the question we just had, is there any penalty on the owner if the emergency contact doesn't show up?
At this point, no, but that's something we could rework into the ordinance and see if we could also impose a penalty on the owner. The reason probably it wasn't initially in there is we know who the emergency contact is. It's going to have to be a physical person. Well, the owner could be an LLC and a fictitious person. But we could make it a violation on the owner as well. It'll just be slightly harder to enforce, but we can enforce it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me that it would be imposed on the owner as well. I can understand it may be more difficult to enforce, particularly if it's out of state.
Yeah, we can certainly update the ordinance and include that as well, make it penalize the owner for their emergency contact not showing up.
Done? Good. Councilwoman Whitehead?
Can't we require that the owner be a person as well, that if the owner of the property is an LLC, they provide an owner contact?
The state statute allows us to provide emergency contact and also a complaint contact. Doesn't specifically authorize us to do that. So that's a really good question. Ultimately, it's easy enough to find out who the members of LLCs are. We can look them up in the Corporation Commission. We certainly can explore looking at that angle.
Okay. Yeah, and I strongly support the requirement that a physical person show up. Otherwise, why are they running a business here? And I definitely like Councilman Durham's suggestion that we levy a fine on the owner, LLC, or owner person, and as well as the emergency contact.
We will certainly incorporate council's suggestions to the best of our ability.
Councilwoman Littlefield, and then myself.
Yeah, I would like to second that also, or third that, whatever it is. I think those are good suggestions to look into. Thank you.
So my comment is that perhaps for years there have been rogue, unreported STRs in Scottsdale, and we need to clamp down so that we do have a contact. I'm for bumping that up to $1,000 and $500 if there's a, no-show in the next couple hours or whatever, because we must spur the responsible parties to come forward, and having us police these properties costs citizens of Scottsdale money and takes our resources away from other neighborhoods and situations. 1,800 of those apparently have been already responded to. That is an outrageous number in Scottsdale. So I think we'll move to the next issue if you have a segment to offer.
Yes, Mayor, I'd be happy to. So the next ordinance we're going to talk about is the unruly party and nuisance party and unruly gathering ordinance. And that is something we, or the City Council passed a few years ago, right when the short-term vacation rental issue started getting out of control, right soon after the state preempted us. Now it applies to all occupancies, owner-occupied, long-term rentals and short-term vacation rentals. State law requires us to treat nuisances involving short-term vacation rentals the same as we would treat a nuisance in an owner-occupied house or a long-term rental. One of the things that the City Council and the working group were very concerned about was the issue of noise. So one of the things that the amended ordinance does, it adds noise levels and measurement criteria. It better defines what excess noise is, and I'll talk about that in greater detail in a moment. It replaces the police service fee and administrative hearing process with a civil citation process. The reason why we're doing that is we've had to duplicate things administratively that the court already has the capabilities for. For example, collections, they have civil hearing officers already, and while we thought it would be an easier process, well, it has turned out to be much more efficient the last few months thanks to our business services director, Whitney Pitt, who's done a great job handling the administrative appeals. We think putting this responsibility in the court will ultimately make it more effective. The other thing that we've done is we've changed the fines for hosts for the responsible parties versus owners. The fines are going to be steeper on owners initially, and responsible parties a little less so. What we found is a lot of the people that were getting police service fees were not from Scottsdale, and they were never going to be coming back. So we feel if we start out a little bit of lower fine with them, it's more likely they'll pay it rather than try to contest it and so on. We also have a provision in there that allows the court to mitigate or suspend fines if the owner can show they've taken efforts to mitigate issues within their short-term vacation rentals. Examples of that would be installing noise mitigation or monitoring software, posting best practices, rules for the resident, observing best practices for engaging in the rental of short-term vacation rentals. We also define habitual offenders, which would be someone who has committed multiple violations and has been found responsible and fined. Those situations could be churned into a criminal prosecution. And if, Kelsey, if you don't mind, if you could go to the ordinance itself. Again, thank you. And if you could change to the second page of the ordinance. So throughout the ordinance, you'll see various definitions and such that have to do with noise readings, like defining what an A-band is and what a C-band is. A-band, the way I look at it in my layman's perspective, is like normal noise, and C-band is bass. And a lot of times, bass is what's bothering people. And the city has noise meters that can measure both A-band and C-band. So one of the things that we've done is we've just defined what excessive noise means. One of the grounds for a nuisance party was excessive noise, but we didn't define it in the ordinance before. And we created basically a reasonable person standard where excessive noise means noise caused by a nuisance party or unruly gathering that disturbs the peace or quiet of a residence or neighborhood from the perspective of a reasonable person of normal sensibilities. For deciding that noise is excessive pursuant to this article, a reasonable person of normal sensibility shall include Scottsdale police officers or other city employees authorized to enforce this article. That's important because generally the peace of a police officer can't be disturbed. So that's why we put that in the provision in this ordinance so they can count of having their peace disturbed. A sound meter may be used, but is not required to assist in determining whether noise is excessive or not. Should be a rebuttable presumption under this article that noise levels over 68 dBA or 70 dBc between 10 p.m. and 9 a.m. are considered excessive if they can be heard beyond the property line where the nuisance party or unruly gathering is occurring. And those levels are somewhat placeholders at this point. Now, some of the stuff that we've done, Mr. Stockwell, for example, consulted a noise ecologist, and who was not really a fan of noise meters at all, and told us, probably something everyone in this room knows, that what is considered loud noise is subjective, and whether it's bothersome or burdensome is subjective. Some people are very sensitive to noise, some people are not. That's why we have that normal sensibilities. And we want our officers and other enforcement people to look at the totality of the circumstances, all the factors, time of day. And right now, in terms of a noise reading, we have so it's not required that you use a noise reading. You can use it at any time of day, but it's a rebuttable presumption. And why is it a rebuttable presumption? Because the burden is always on us to prove that there's a violation. So if after 10 you exceed one of those levels, then it's presumed to be excessive. Now, the police have been doing some testing with their meters, and in one instant, they and it was a sergeant that lives in Scottsdale. He was inside his house and just tested the ambient noise with a ceiling fan on. It was 68 on the sea level. So you have to be very careful that with the type of levels that are crafted, because you don't want to end up making it illegal for a pool party at 3 in the afternoon to violate. And sometimes, just simple talking can actually have pretty high noise levels. So at this point, those numbers, which would be, we think are pretty reasonable for that time period of time. There are other communities that do have lower standards. Paradise Valley's had a noise ordinance in place for years. They don't have the C level, but they have the A level, and it's actually very low. It's 50. I'm not sure how they, and it's, I think it's at all times a day. I'm not sure how they are able to not arrest people for kids' pool parties or not, but that's the standard. So that's one of the big changes here. The other big changes are just getting rid of the police services, going to a strict citation system, and the owner will be responsible as well. And so the responsible person is usually the person having the party, right? Could be the owner if they're on site. But they'll also be citable if they either intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly allow the party to proceed or to happen. It's another important part of why it's important to get the emergency context physically there. And then we changed the fine structure and aligned what the task force recommended. So for an owner, a first offense is $750, second offense is $1,500, and a third or subsequent offense is $2,500. The maximum fine that we can generally impose is, unless otherwise authorized by state laws, is $2,500. The habitual offenders has a different fine scheme. Since it's a criminal offense, there's in the Penal Code of Arizona in Title 13, there's a provision that allows higher fines on fictitious entities, on LLCs or corporations. So that's why you see a higher fine schedule there if we were to go to criminal. And there's some other miscellaneous provisions in here. For example, when our police are responding to one of these nuisance parties, whether it's owner-occupied or short-term vacation rental, people might not be willing to give their information. So this gives the police the authority to require them to provide a name and date of birth. So that's helpful for the enforcement and also the authority to detain and serve people for the suspected civil violations. At this point, I'll take any questions anyone might have.
Councilmember Durham?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. The definition of a habitual offender requires that they have not paid the previous civil fines from their 4 prior offenses. Why is that requirement in there, that they have not paid their fines? Why?
So it's basically a scofflaw provision. A scofflaw provision where we could change it, but the people that are actually paying their civil fines, at some point, they're probably going to come into compliance. I mean, we could do both. It's mainly the deal with the people that are scofflaws and that are just basically not complying with anything. But we could certainly just make it if they have 4 prior civil violations. The problem, there are some difficulties, especially if it turns out to be a fictitious person, but we certainly can change that.
Yeah, that's something I would at least consider if someone's had 4 prior violations and hasn't done anything to come into compliance, that 4 violations within 24 months, it seems to me that's at least worth thinking of charging them as habitual offender just on that.
Some of it is also based on our experience with the police service fees. We had a couple properties. One was on Mitchell Street, and they received a lot of police service fees, and they ultimately ended up selling the property We had another one where they had multiple violations, and they ended up selling the property. So we've ultimately, in the most cases, been able to get people eventually into compliance with civil sanctions, but we certainly, councilmen, can take a look at that and change that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I realize we'll also have an ordinance and zoning presentation coming up, but generally speaking, wouldn't you say that occupancy and large numbers correlate with noise? And whether it's a daytime party or a nighttime party, you know, if 75 people show up,
Absolutely.
that seems like it's an area that it may not be covered in the legal citations, but seems to relate to, we do have governance over that as a city in terms of number of occupants and safety issues as well. Right.
Yes, Mayor, we do to a certain degree. We currently regulate the number, what a single family is, and how many people can live in a residence. The issue that we encounter with that, and certainly an officer that responded to a nuisance party could take into account the number of people when deciding that it was either a nuisance party or the noise was excessive. The problem that we face is the occupancy. In terms of living people can have guests over and invite people over. So it's, and so we don't have an absolute limit as long as it doesn't get unsafe to the number of people that can be on a particular property. We don't have a per se limit except for people living there, which is in the zoning ordinance.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll move on to the next section, please.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, Mayor and members of the council, that was a great segue because the next thing we're going to talk about is occupancy. And I highlighted all these also in the memo that was provided in there, but the first one that we just wanted to highlight on occupancy, it is definitely a common complaint that we hear. There are some real challenges with enforcing it. My understanding, you can either get crosswise with the freedom of privacy by trying to kind of figure out who actually is sleeping within the home, or you can get into problems with freedom of association, which is how many people a property owner is inviting over to their house. So as of right now, what we've focused our efforts on are the negative results associated with occupancy, and those were things that were addressed in the nuisance party ordinance. So what are the problems that happen when large number of people gather together rather than just the sheer fact of people coming together? But we continue, as it's noted in here, we are continuing to look at other ordinances and continuing to also enforce on any properties that are advertising occupancy exceeding the ordinance requirements. And so if we get a complaint about it, or we notice on an advertisement that they're saying that more than 6 adults and their related dependent children can stay there, then we're enforcing on that. And we'll continue to do so, and I believe that the Rentalscape technology will also help us with that. And Mayor, to the point that you were making earlier about, I had it and then I said it, the question you made earlier, the technology will also help us with that, trying to figure out, I can't even remember what it is now, but that's the hard thing about being up here and trying to answer all the questions. So, so the Rentalscape technology is going to be really helpful with the occupancy requirements, and we're looking at them too. And because we have to make sure that anything that we do with short-term rentals in this area at least also has to be applied to long-term rentals and single-family residences, we're always running things through a filter and making sure, would an owner-occupied residence be okay with that rule as well? And so we've certainly been looking through it about, number of cars that are parked there and all these other things. So I just wanted to highlight that as an issue that came up with the working group. You told us to look into it. We're still looking into it, but there's some challenges associated with that. Are you signifying that you have a question? Yeah.
It looks like Councilwoman Whitehead has a comment.
Yeah, so I want to go back. So you just said now, I think this is quite a big difference. So now if I have a constituent who calls me and says, I have an advertisement for a 3-bedroom house that sleeps 15 adults, our city code enforcement can respond and take action?
Yeah, Mayor, members of the council, Councilwoman Whitehead. Yeah, and I think we've specifically had that happen. So you guys have let us know about a citizen that had a property right next to them, and it was advertising in excess of the ordinance requirement, and they were issued a notice of violation, and we worked with them until they got into compliance with it. Now, let me clarify, because, and I have to clarify this with people all the time. So the zoning ordinance says 6 adults or their related dependent children. So if their advertisement says sleeps 18, right, and it's if it's not clarifying that it's only 6 adults are allowed, that's what we're clarifying. Because you could have 18 people staying at a residence, it's just only 6 of them could be adults. The rest of them would have to be their children.
So that's kind of a big loophole, no?
Loophole, or that's what the zoning ordinance says. It says 6 adults and their related dependent children. So we are enforcing it and having them include requirements that say no more than 6 adults can stay there, and we're enforcing on that, and we're getting compliance. And the Rentalscape technology will be helpful with this, because then we can proactively scan and look to see if advertisements are advertising in excess of the ordinance, and then work to get those addressed.
And still, that's earth-shattering, because that's not what we were able to do a short while ago. So thank you. That's a good update. Thanks.
You're welcome. So on the next item on the additional regulations, so one of the other things that we included in the recommendations was that we were going to analyze data on complaints and calls for service to see if additional regulations are warranted relating to fire and building codes, health or sanitation, and traffic control. And we've reached out to that. We've talked to the fire chief about that. We've been looking at our calls for service data, and we're not seeing trends in that warrant doing additional requirements in that area. However, we're also looking at other best practices and studies that have been out there. I will say from a very practical level, this is also very much related to the letter that you sent to the legislature, which asked for a level playing field between hotel properties and short-term rentals. And so if you're staying in a hotel, you know that the the smoke alarms in the room are checked, and that the access plans there are checked, and you know that the pools are checked and maintained regularly, and the jacuzzis are checked and maintained regularly. All those things are done because they're at a hotel. When you stay at a short-term rental, that may or may not be the case. And so we're continuing to explore those areas and look at the relatively limited authority that the state legislature has given us to look in these particular areas. And as we get more, we're required to demonstrate that those regulations are necessary for public safety. So we are working on the demonstration of that, and as we're able to demonstrate that, we will bring back those additional to you. So I just want to let you know we haven't forgot about that. We continue to work on that, and we're also having discussions with Experience Scottsdale about how we can work with the tourism industry to kind of identify those regulations, and we're working on all those and continuing to work on those. So the last but not least is the issue that Mr. Landau and Ms. Ambrose raised and Dr. Kirtley raised, and that is the issue of rental of detached casitas or guest houses separate from the main residence. And as mentioned in Dr. Kirtley's presentation she put on the Elmo, the zoning ordinance currently states that all dwelling units in any accessory guest houses must be rented or offered for rent together and may not be rented or offered for rent independently. And so, of course, you have this request that the council consider changing this requirement to allow owners to rent casitas or guest houses separately from the main residence. I know in the presentation that was provided to you, it was if the owner was in the main house and renting the guest house. I do know that during the working group process, and the working group members will remember this, there was a person that testified as well that they actually live in the guest house and rent out the main house. So you certainly have residents in Scottsdale that have both of those situations. And Randy Grant will talk in a minute about why specifically we have in there and what you may be able to do about it. I also think it's important to note that Mr. Landau and Mrs. Ambrose, when they talked about the complaint that they got that complaint because a resident of Scottsdale went on Airbnb or Expedia Verbo and found all of the properties within the city of Scottsdale that were advertising casitas for rent independently of the main house, and took it on themselves to go to ScottsdaleAZ and submit a violation for each one of those. So they were one of about, I think, 20 or 30 properties citywide that were identified by a citizen that knew that this was a violation of the ordinance and was trying to take it on themselves to try and help enforce the city's ordinances with regards to short-term rentals. So I'm just pointing that out because for every one of those houses that was doing that, we also heard from people during the working group that were concerned about casitas on people's properties. So it's a difficult issue, but we wanted to make sure and identify it for you so that you had that issue. So if you want your zoning administrator and planning and economic development tourism director to come up, Randy Grant, he can talk a little bit more about that issue, and then you can ask questions about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. Please proceed.
Mayor Ortega, members of the council, Randy Grant. This is something that in light of the litany of complaints that have been lodged about short-term rentals, this looks to be fairly benign. But I will tell you, having managed code enforcement time after time over the past 30 years, rentals of casitas and guest houses has been an issue. And we can always find a situation in which it makes a lot of sense for that condition, but I don't think we would be able to put in the time to determine whether or not the owner of a property is actually living in the main quarters or not. A lot of properties are listed under trusts. A lot of properties are listed under corporate names. And so it's not quite as simple as just saying the owner needs to live there, as logical as that may be. That certainly would reduce the complaints. I think an on-site manager would be more likely to manage the property more appropriately. But you're essentially taking a single-family lot and you're creating two dwellings on it. It would not be different than having a duplex on one lot. You have two dwellings in the duplex. They're usually separated by a common wall, but we've seen houses that have come in and put in 3 kitchens. And the only reason you would put in 3 kitchens is you're too hungry to go upstairs or downstairs to eat, or you're locking those doors off and you're creating dwelling units, separate and independent. And so we could do an ordinance amendment to allow that to occur, but I would suggest that you think through all of the ramifications, because it's going to be very difficult to control that to simply the owner on site. And I think you would find that you would have twice the number of parking complaints, twice the number of vehicle complaints in the driveway. You'd have transient traffic coming in and out more frequently than a single-family residence. So you'd have all of those impacts, and just something to consider in thinking that through.
And I will comment about that. So typically we have zoning R143. That means one residence per acre. And a single family dwelling, it could be 5,000 square feet, it could be 2,500 square feet on that 1 acre. And it is possible to have a mother-in-law or a casita set up, which can be done, and there's limitations on size, but typically, if it is a family member, so-called nucleus family member, And there's a definition for that as well, if a group of people live as one unit, okay? But when you have a transient population and effectively 2 units, it would be basically a new zoning category, R243, R2 residents in a 1-acre lot. And that's not acceptable. That breaches all of Scottsdale's traditional classifications. There's R140, there's R135, R190 that would say 1 residence per 5 acres or 3 acres. Those are definitions that have defined our zoning. Now, it is true, I'm not for shifting the gears so radically, because this is what's going to happen. What it means is an LLC will say, gee, I just found out I can basically do a lot split or provide 2 homes or 2 single residences on the same lot. So if it didn't have a casita, they would build one, and then that would enable, again, double the problem, double the headache, et cetera, and a radical change. Now, you know, Jerome, we've known each other for a long time, and we know that you've explained your situation with Mom and so forth. The problem is that if this were granted, at some point, life may change for a particular similar situation, and they would say, gee, I'm going to move to an assisted care, and gosh, I've got 2 cash flows coming if they were to change their physical situation or whatever. By saying an LLC is going to occupy one place or another, again, it could be some conglomerate somewhere or other, and it does not relate to the occupancy, which would be changed, and the rule would run with the land. In other words, one could get this as a ma and pa operation, and for some reason something changed radically in your lives, and you'd say, well, wow, I'm going to now sell it, and now it's a commercial property with 2. It surpassed that mom and pop operation of somebody living there kindly and knowing what's going on. And really, the other problem is most seniors are not property managers, right? They're not able or capable to do that, and you may end up even having a casita here, the main building here, and 2 different users of the swimming pool that are squabbling, and who knows what's going to happen. It can happen, and the city ends up violating our general policy when we would normally handle lot splits based on sizes and subdivision control. So most of our discussion tonight has been the pitfalls and how the state has handcuffed us to make our regulations and make sound decisions because they've preempted us, and this would bring in a whole new category of short-term rentals with whatever particular intention that it started with to be a much larger problem in your low-density areas where you do have that the 2 families. So it would go from single-family property to 2-family. And I know that some may be there for a month, and some may be there for an operation, and some may be there just for the weekend, because it was listed on a short-term rental, which is less than 30 days. Regardless of whether it was more than 30 days or less than 30 days, we're pretty strict with our controls, saying, sorry, you either have to rent the whole thing, the whole property, which happens to have a casita and a building, to one transaction, then have it split. And that's a very firm planning aspect that I think I'm more concerned about holding to that. Other situations about parking, garages, pool enclosures, security and all that ends up being rather awkward because the guy in the casita may not be breaking any noise rules, right? But the one in the main house maybe just letting all hell break loose, right? So this is where it is not in my opinion, at first blush, I don't think even saying, well, it's easy, we'll just say as long as whoever owns it is living in the big house or the little house, that could change just with the sale of the property, and it could be, radically change the number, effectively double or triple the number of these rentals, which increases our problem. That's my overall opinion at this point. I'm not convinced. I understand that if some transaction were done in our zoning change, that of course having that ability is sellable, right? You could sell the property and it could run to somebody else that would not be you, and it would not have the same personal aspect that would be in consideration. I have Councilwoman Whitehead, Councilmember Durham. That's kind of my opinion so far on this issue. Councilwoman Whitehead and then Durham.
Thanks, Mayor. So these casitas were built. They went through the process and they were authorized to be built. What are the requirements for a person with a lot that has room for a casita, and they come to the city and they want to build a casita? What are the basic rules?
Well, if you go back historically, we tried to limit the expansion of residential use of a property by preventing the installation of a kitchen in the guest house. Over time, that proved to be difficult because people would go in, they were then encouraged to go in and make the improvements without getting building permits. So we said what is now in the ordinance, that you're able to keep those properties and use them as an extension of the residence, but you can't rent them out. So if a mother-in-law situation comes up, you're able to use it for that purpose, but not being able to rent it out was the restriction that kept it from becoming an apartment or a second unit.
Sure, and I understand, and I think we're going to just have to, the state has thrown us this, can of worms, and the state's initial intention was precisely for the land house. It was like, oh, there'll be somebody who has a casita and they want to rent it out for extra income or an extra bedroom. So we're in this situation, I understand, and I agree with what the mayor said. We're in this situation where, the governor promised us that we're helping senior citizens or young people, whoever, to get a little extra income out of their property, and now the only people that we're excluding from this, tidal wave of short-term rentals are the very people we were trying to pass the law for, or the governor was trying to pass the law for. So I do want to figure out some solutions. I don't think we're going to figure those out today. Okay, let's say, and this is happening, I've spoken with colleagues in other cities. Let's say I have a rental property that I want to put in that third kitchen. What stops me? So it's a single building, it's a single house, but I'm putting in a second or a third kitchen. How is city going to stop me?
Well, what we've discovered is if there's a lot of very creative people, and so it's difficult to try to anticipate how people are going to avoid the law. But we would look at, when they come in for a tenant improvement, to look at the number of kitchens. We probably would question that. We probably would ask, can you lock that off from the other portion of the unit? And we would go through a process of trying to determine whether or not this is simply creating an additional amenity for the people that live there or creating a second dwelling unit. It's not perfect, but it's what we have to work with.
Okay, so again, it seems to me that we have an issue, and it's not the casita per se, it's the fact that we have entities, whether they're residents or not, trying to abuse our single-family resident zoning. And I think it's wrong for us to single out casitas. I think that I would rather see, and you mentioned that it's difficult to prove that the owner lives there. Maybe we don't care. Maybe all we care is for, or maybe we grandfather in. If you have a casita that's been approved by the city, that I don't see why it should be excluded from this all-out, change to our community of short-term rentals. But what I would like to see, and then if we manage to rein in some of these short-term rentals, maybe then the casitas fall into that same category. If we start saying, if we're back to saying you can only have 1 month rentals, that would apply to everybody. But I guess it's just not clear to me how we can allow LLCs that aren't in this country to buy up entire townhome communities and then pinpoint a few 20 casitas. I'd rather be a little bit more, I hear what you're saying, I hear what the mayor's saying. I guess I would ask staff to think about how do we handle that situation where it's at least a level playing field with the situation we have now, which is this short-term rentals are everywhere.
They are, and I agree. It's a challenge. The difference is that with a short-term rental, they're renting a single-family dwelling. It's the amount of time that they're renting it for that has become the distinction. Previously, you had to rent it for 30 days or more because that is by month is the typical lease rate, and most people that are leasing a single-family house are leasing it for a year at a time. So the 30 days was a way to determine whether or not the occupancy was going to turn over faster than it normally would. We can certainly look at other options. I think the thing that is going to be difficult for us to do is to try to define that as not a duplex.
No, I hear you. Also, I guess I'd be interested to know how many, I see casitas all over the place near where I live. And I suspect that they sure look like they're rented. And they're on large properties. I don't think they're short-term rentals because I see the same car when I run by on my daily jog or whatever. But I think maybe we need a better handle on what's really going on. So, because I think if we are going to have an ordinance, we need to really see if it's an ordinance we are enforcing equally across the board. I'll wait and see what other comments there are.
What we'll do is we have comment from City Attorney and then Councilmember Durham.
Thank you, Mayor. While we're on this topic, I just wanted to alert the council that if the zoning ordinance is changed to allow single-family owners to rent out their casitas for either long-term or short-term rentals, that would then require us to also allow folks who are renting their single-family residence for short-term rental to also be able to rent that casita out separately. We can't, part of the way that state law has preempted the city is not to allow us to treat single-family homeowners different than the short-term rentals. So I just want to make sure the council understands the consequence of that would also be that a short-term rental property owner could decide to rent both the home to one short-term renter and the casita to another.
That's an important clarification. This law is just keeps giving. So, thank you.
Good, and we have Councilmember Durham and then Councilwoman Littlefield.
Thank you. One of the advantages of this system that I think is present that Ms. Kirtley didn't mention is the problem that short-term rentals often reduce our housing stock, which is a big problem. But if you're renting out a casita, that's not interfering or reducing our housing stock. So it seems to me that being able to rent casitas is beneficial in that sense because it doesn't take out a house which would otherwise be available to a family. it sounds to me like that this rule hasn't been enforced, and we haven't seen the collapse of anything in Scottsdale as a result of that. I'm sure it's going on all over, and so I don't see that anyone has believed that there's a lot of damage or problems arising from that. To the contrary, I think that there's going to be better supervision of the premises in terms of loud parties and nuisance parties and so forth and so on. So I think that's less likely to occur in these situations. I guess I'm not sure why there would need to be a zoning change because it doesn't sound to me like that converts it into a multi-family property, just if you have a short-term rental of a separate piece of property. Maybe there is something, but you know, if there was some way of just saying that you can rent your casita, as Ms. Kirtley suggested, I don't know if that conflicts with our zoning laws somehow, but it doesn't seem to me like it would be that complicated. And I think there may be some issues here, but it seems to me that they're not insurmountable.
Well, he's a zoning official, so he'll tell you where the code problem is in terms of whether it's enforced or not, and whether there's 2 residents allowed. But let's go ahead, because he's the zoning official that has to say, it appears as though there are 2 buildings here rented to 2 separate parties, or could be rented to 2 separate parties. Go ahead.
Well, there may be 2 separate properties and buildings, but you know, possibly it's that one of them is not a dwelling. If the casita doesn't have a kitchen, I've seen properties defined in other ways as not being a dwelling if they didn't have a kitchen, because it's, you know, this occurred when I was looking at once in some laws in Minnesota, that a unit without a kitchen was not considered to be a dwelling.
Well, let's hear from the zoning administrator, and then we'll go to Councilwoman Littlefield, Councilwoman Janik.
Mayor, Councilman Durham, the ordinance is very specific, that there are 3 criteria that allow a guest house to occur. The 3rd criteria is that it's not rented out. So we would definitely need to change the ordinance to accomplish that. Now, you're right, in the past, not having a kitchen was the way that we distinguished a guest unit from a second dwelling unit. But I don't think that having challenges with enforcement means that we haven't enforced it. We've looked at it every time a property has come in for an improvement that's required a permit. It's just that it's hard to legislate what somebody does after the permit's been issued. So we know that they're out there, but the best way that we have of monitoring that is the neighbors will look at the traffic that's coming onto the property. If they know that's the mother, you know, that's staying with them, they're not going to file a complaint. If it turns into every weekend it's a different group coming in, they'll file a complaint. And so we deal with that quite a bit. And again, it's not a perfect scenario because there's so many gray areas and there's so many ways to manipulate it. But we really try to maintain that single-family lot as a single dwelling unit that may have an accessory unit that a relative comes to live in, but not churning every week.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Littlefield, and then Councilwoman Janik.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor. I understand what you're saying with my head. My heart doesn't like it and the reason is it doesn't sound rational. Here we are with a huge shortage of places for people to live. We had a man come in from the state to talk to us the other day who was saying, you're going to enclose your garages so you can rent them out to people to use as apartments. And now you can't use a casita to rent out, which is designed as a separate unit for livability. It doesn't make logical sense. One of the things maybe we ought to do is talk to the state and say, are you planning on changing these rules and regulations for us? Because if you are, we'd like to know, because you never know what they're going to do. But that's one thing. I do agree with Councilwoman Whitehead that it's logical to use it. I mean, just on the front end of it, it's logical. You've got this bedroom and a little living room area, and if whether or not it has a kitchen or not, you could have a microwave in there, you have a bathroom, and it's perfectly livable for a person to go in there. We had a casita in a house we lived in Belisara, and we bought it specifically for the casita because our daughter was going to college in Flagstaff, and she came home on weekends, and it was a great place for her to stay, hang out. We never tried to rent it, but it was there, and it would have been on any other place where you could have rented it. You couldn't do it in Belisara, but if you could, it would have been logical to say, hey, I need a little extra money this month and next month and for the, to make ends meet, so I'll just rent out the unused casita that's sitting there in the backyard. It seems like a partial answer to the shortage of living space in Scottsdale right now, but we can't do it because of our zoning ordinance and because of the state enforcing that. I think maybe the place to start is look at the state and say, which way do you guys want to go here? We're getting really conflicting, stories from you. You want us to enclose our garage, but you don't want us to rent out a casita that's in the backyard, that's sitting there and ready. So I don't know. I understand what you're saying, Mr. Grant, and I agree with your concerns and your issues on it, but maybe there's a way that we could, eventually work around this, because the state, they ought to at least give us somewhat, direction to go in the same direction.
Well, I certainly agree that the state imposed on us some conditions that we're now having to deal with. But the state's regulation says you can't treat a single-family residence different than you treat a short-term rental. It's still one unit on the property. So there's nothing that's telling us that, that we need to look at accessory uses or guest houses or anything else differently than we have historically. I certainly understand the argument, and conditions here are different than they have been in the past, so maybe it's something that we want to look at. But I would just say it's not something you go back from. Yeah. Once we've implemented that, we're dealing with people that don't have the good intentions that these folks have, and we're dealing with people that are simply trying to maximize the profit on the property, and they don't care who they rent to and so on and so forth. That becomes a problem.
I understand that totally, and that's true. But anyway, it just seems like the state is giving us conflicting information on what they think is a good thing to do and what they think isn't. So, but that's not unusual either.
Okay, thank you. Next, Councilwoman Janik, and then Councilmember Milhaven.
On the surface, I think it sounds like a great idea, and it could help alleviate our problems with we don't have enough places for people to live. But to me, this falls under the theory of unintended consequences. What if what happened with short-term rentals happens with homes with casitas? Big companies move in, they say, that house has a casita, I'll pay whatever price you want. And then all of a sudden, we've got 2 short-term rentals on one parcel. And then we have the neighbors complaining. Now, maybe there's a way to rein it in, and I don't pretend to know that way, but I definitely think we need to look at it very thoroughly and poke holes in it and see, can this really be done in a legitimate fashion? That's my only comment. Thank you.
Councilmember Milhaven.
Thank you, Councilmember Janik. That was exactly sort of where my mind was going, right? When I first heard, when Ms. Kirtley first came and said, shouldn't people be allowed to rent their casitas, I thought, oh, certainly, right? You're there, you're on premises, they're going to behave, you can monitor it better, makes all the sense in the world. But then talking to staff and recognizing it's multifamily housing, you're opening the door to people building it's a single family residents, you're opening the door, and we know these institutional investors are spending big money. And Councilwoman Whitehead talked about, right, they're buying entire townhome complexes for the sole purpose of being short-term rentals. I would imagine, I mean, not just buying property specifically for the casitas, but having a proliferation of casitas being built, or potentially, 1 acre lots with 4 or 5 casitas on them. And I know that may sound ridiculous, but when there's a lot of money to be made, folks will find a way. So while I'm very sympathetic and I hope we could find a way for you to be able to continue to rent your casita, I think Councilwoman Janik's well-made point is we need to be careful of the unintended consequences, because as Mr. Grant said, once we open that door, we'll never be able to close it again. I think we need to be really, really cautious about what this would mean longer term. So thank you.
Vice Mayor Caputi?
Yeah, I agree. I think we absolutely have a housing shortage in this city, and it's such a thorny issue because, of course, we would want to help people who just want to rent out a casita, but of course people are going to take advantage of putting more housing. I just gave the city manager an article on this like 2 weeks ago about what's happening in California, where they're starting to subdivide. People will be in the house, and then you start to have this exact situation where, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, I'm just saying, of course, that will become multifamily housing. I mean, that will be multifamily housing, so we will have to make a decision that we're going to zone for multifamily, in my opinion, because of all the reasons that are being brought up right now. So I don't know how it's sensitive, right? I don't know how you create a solution for one person who's trying to do the right thing without, of course it's going to result in more housing, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, it just is going to result in more housing being provided on people's homes.
Okay, done. I think with what we've covered, you're looking for a consensus in my opinion, if we were to provide, this is a form of blanket duplex overlay, which is not acceptable. That is 2 units per acre, and it's just not in our general plan. It's not in our philosophy. It renders. I've designed many of these. Okay, for people in Paradise Valley, they're limited to 2,500 square feet. In Scottsdale, they're under 2,000 square feet, typically for a 1 acre lot. I've designed them for motorcycle collectors, right? Where actually the mother-in-law also lives there, and then they use it for a nice home collection for their personal use. So this is, for me, a very important, impactful area, because the last vestige of local control is our own zoning. And that is absolutely vital. When the state cannot preempt us on our zoning decisions, then to give that up or let it be too loose, in my opinion, works very much in contrary. And it's not a question of whether or not we're enforcing it well enough, because we've been through that drill on short-term rentals and how difficult that is. But then doubling the problem that we would have created ourselves is not in our best interest. So that's the final. Did you have a wrap-up?
Yeah, Mayor, members of the council, if I could wrap up. So we will be bringing back the vacation rental and nuisance party ordinances for you during your meeting on December, I think, 7th or 8th. We'll make the adjustments that we talked about tonight, bring that back in final form so that you could vote on that. My sense is on this last issue that a majority of council would be okay if we researched this issue further and brought back an initiation of a text amendment at the same time in December, so that you could vote on whether or not the text amendment should be initiated. And so you'll get a little bit more information on that. You can make that decision at that time. It'll go through a public outreach process, and then we'll bring back it'll go to the Planning Commission, and then we'll bring back the final, if you vote to initiate it at that time. I just wanted to clarify that. That was what I heard, and we'll proceed with that unless we hear differently right now. Okay.
Well, I think we've concluded the purpose of a study session, that is healthy exchange of questions and And really appreciate the staff, again, the committee that worked on this. It ultimately is in our hands, and I am very pleased to say that we do have a general plan that is going to be unfolding as we look at other ordinance impacts, and applaud that one way or the other that people helped to craft it, and that this council was able to craft it. And certainly this issue would be a vital change in that, I believe, that the mandate that just occurred with our general plan. I anticipate that the canvassing of the results, election results, will happen at the next council meeting. With that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn. So moved and tripled. Register your vote. Thank you.
Pretty good. We're seeing a lot of dirt and not a lot of roots. If you had seen some roots that were traveling around the inside of the soil, right on the container's edge, those are roots that you might want to score with a knife. This isn't all that bad, so I might just rough it up a little bit to free up some of these roots. Those circling roots would need to be cut so that they would